gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls.
Hello everybody, I completely messed up my first episode on Bards, so I decided that I should just completely redo it. Uh, I'll try to streamline it a bit more so it's better and more presentable, but not by much. But either way, I'm gonna talk about Bards because tomorrow is the stream. Tomorrow is the Bard stream and haircut, and supposedly the A2 release announcement, and hopefully character creator announcement, potentially even right on the day. We'll see. But either way, let's get started. So, Ashes of Creation through the lens of Lineage 2. Oh my god, almost professional. Let's start. We'll start by basics. In Lineage 2, we have block of buffs. Let's go with this. Usually, and this is a later version, but usually it's 24 by 12 buffs. 24 generalized buffs from several different classes, and 12 buffs by a sinner and a dancer, who are the main bard relatives of what we will supposedly see in Ashes. So if you wanna optimize your character's buffs, you gotta have a sinner, a dancer, and potentially 2 different classes of buffers in your party, which usually means that in Lineage 2 it was a 9-person party, so you'd have 5 people left to DPS or to be a tank, to be a healer, because healers weren't buffers, so you had limited choices. Yeah, Dion's Son is one of the most nostalgic ones, especially if you've played mostly the older versions of Lineage 2. But to start us off, I'll remove all the buffs. This is a Prophet, one of the most beloved buffers in the game, mostly because it's a single target buffer who has, as you can see, a shit ton of different buffs, and is usually used by mostly solo players if you have a friend who can play this buffer, or as an alt account or with a second game window. So this is mainly the case because in Lineage 2 buffs last 20 minutes. So we cast it, it's on me, and 19 minutes left, well, with some seconds. So because of this, especially this class, the single target class, used to sell their services, i.e. buffs, in cities, because L2 relies on teleportation to move around the world, so you'd see a shit ton of these buffers stand around teleporters in towns and just sell their buffs for like 100 gold or something, or usually way more. And in Lineage 2, gold is the only main currency, so it's not WoW-like where you have like 3-4 stages of it, so whatever. The main case, because of the long duration of buffs, these single target buffer classes could sell their services and make some good money. When it comes to Ashes and what I would prefer, I'd say that I'd personally like if we didn't have these many buffs at that long of a duration. Maybe a few here and there at like 20 or 30 minutes, but definitely not stuff like this where you can pretty much fill out your entire buff slots and just go farm for 20 or potentially even 30 minutes. So I would prefer shorter durations, mostly because I want bards to be active and to make it slightly harder to have a off bard that's just an open window rather than a plain character, plain player. But in terms of buffs themselves, I'll go line by line. I tried to organize them in a somewhat logical manner, but whatever. The most basic ones, the first one that I casted is a physical attack buff. We've got physical defense, we've got magical defense, we've got movement speed, we've got accuracy. I believe Lineage shouldn't have magical accuracy, but I think Ashes will have it, so we'll see about that. and if we have buffs for it, hopefully Bard shows us buffs of this type. Well, we'll see. Next we've got attack speed, we've got critical rates, we've got critical damage. Also all stuff mostly for physical fighters, so archers, melee fighters, rogues with their daggers and stuff. So this was usually used as a buffer for physical classes. We've got somewhat of a random buff of land capacity if you wanna swim underwater for a long time. In Lineage 2, barely anyone used this because barely any locations had you go underwater or through water, but considering that Ashes will have a shit ton of water, I assume we will have something similar in Ashes as well. Although probably in the form of a potion or food or something like that, because putting this kind of stuff on a bard would be a bit too restrictive for pretty much anyone out there. As for another semi-random buff is shield defense. This is usually used by tanks because their defensive passives allow them to have higher shield defense stats, but even if you're using a normal shield on a normal character, there is some reason to have it. Do they sell this shit? Do I have the money? No, I do not have the money. Well, either way, shields have some stat of defense of the shield itself. So if I recall correctly how it works, the incoming damage, if it's in the conal shape at the side of the shield, so here it would be on the left side of the character, like this kind of cone of attack, and you can turn around to try and catch attacks with your shield. So that incoming damage would be first reduced by the shield by a certain amount, then by your defense, and then you'd be hitting HP, if I recall correctly. So 15% increase in that defense, you would usually increase it by like 10 or 20 incoming damage, because even the strongest shields, I believe, are like at 200 or 300 defense. Let's check it. Let's see, like the highest one. 400. This is like the peak shield in the game, pretty much 400 physical defense. So yeah, not too much, although on tanks it's definitely useful. Next line of buffs, we've got the stronger buff for physical attack, and as you can see, it's not replacing the previous one, mostly because it's a stronger form, and it appeared on this character at a later stage of progress. We've got the same greater buff for physical defense, but these two are replaceable, so they replace each other. So you either choose to be more defensive or more offensive. In terms of HP and mana, basic increasement in those stats. We've got HP regen higher, we've got casting speed, which is a relatively widespread buff among buffers, but the next buffer that I'll be showcasing doesn't have it, even though that buffer is a mostly mage party buffer, so kind of weird. Next we've got concentration. This is mostly to prevent cancellation of casting of abilities. So let's say when you are casting, if you get hit by 100 damage, your cast could be prevented or stopped. So this instead would require that damage to be over 150 to try and cancel your ability. I do hope we have cancelable casts in Ashes, and if we do, then some kind of interaction with buffs or maybe gear or stuff like that would be useful, mostly because I believe it's an interesting interaction, especially its skill showing. If you either know the build of your enemy or just know when to try and use the abilities or attacks that would prevent their important casts. So considering we've got already a few abilities that cast for a fairly long amount of time, canceling them would be very useful. So this interaction, I believe, is quite interesting. Then we've got a huge buff that has a ton of benefits: physical, magical, defense, attack, casting speed increase, resist, and all that stuff, but it reduces your speed. So while it's useful, you usually use this right at the location when you are farming, so you don't really need to run around a lot, but you use it to obviously boost your DPS. Then, as a similar but a double-edged buff to this, we've got Berserker. It also increases physical attack, magical attack, attack speed, casting speed, and running speed by 8, but it decreases your physical and magical defense and evasion. So it's a bit of a glass cannon kind of buff. Then we've got combinational buffs. So as you can see, we've got Bless of the Body, Bless of the Soul, which is HP and MP increasement, not relative, if I can... When I cast this combo buff, those two are removed, but my stats are the same, because this is a 2-in-1 buff. This was mostly added to the game because of the buff bloat, because as you can see, even one class has a ton of buffs, and quite a lot of them are useful in the majority of situations, and the longer the game went on in its lifespan, the more buffs were added. So adding these combos were very useful, because they replace like this one, physical and attack and defense into one, and by the time you have several of these combo buffs from several classes, you can replace the full 24 slots into like 8 or 9, I believe, which was very useful when you try to maximize your DPS or livability output. Then one of the most interesting and important buffs for archers and melee attackers and physical attackers is counter critical. When it's just buffed on you, it gives you physical defense against critical attacks by 30%. So for example, if a rogue hits you for 1000 with a crit, he will instead hit you for 700. So very useful in terms of just cutting off general incoming damage. But when you are getting hit for a certain amount or for a certain period, I don't quite remember which triggers better, you get a buff for 8 seconds that increases your critical damage output. So this would usually be used by physical fighters who had a type of Berserker Rage. So the lower their HP was, the higher their damage output was. And they get hit, they trigger this counter critical additional buff, and they do enormous amounts of damage. So very useful, and I love this mechanic of triggering additional buffs from a base buff dependent on some type of action. In this case it's you getting attacked, but in a different case it could be a bard doing some action, maybe you yourself like cast some ability or spend some mana, or maybe get healed and it gets triggered. So that kind of interaction is, in my opinion, very, very interesting and could be very deep and especially synergistic in a party if designed with that in mind. Then one of the best buffs, especially in 1v1 arena for this class, is the immunity to debuffs. It's only for 30 seconds, while everything else is for 20 minutes. It has KD of 2 minutes without any KD reducing buffs. But while you are under the effect of this buff for 30 seconds, you are completely invincible to any debuffs, which is a huge thing, especially in big PvP fights when your healer is under attack from someone who's trying to debuff him. I'll showcase another bard who is very adamant in his debuffs. So using this at a critical moment is very important. Then we've got a whole line of resistances, mostly basic ones. This one is hold, sleep, and mental resistance, poison, bleed, elemental. In Lineage 2 we had 6 overall elements, the 4 base ones, fire, water, wind, earth, and 2 are holy and dark, so oppositional. This one is pure just elemental. I go up by 20, then we have 4 elemental each, and they all stack together, so we can go by even 20 more. And then we have holy and unholy. And along the lines of resistances we also have elemental attacks. In this case this is just a holy attribute for attack, and this is mostly the base level of buffs when it comes to attack attributes, because quite a lot of mobs in Lineage 2 are unholy or just have weaknesses to holy attacks, so this was usually used if you had no other attack attribute. And in terms of getting attack attributes, it was usually only on higher level weapons, so before you got into level 76 out of 85, so fairly late into the game, you would usually just use this buff instead, just to have some attack attribute. Then we've got some debuffs. Mostly it's root, it's AoE fear, and an interesting buff which is block windwalk, but what it means is that it removes buffs that increase speed on your target. So this is windwalk, which is the most basic buff for movement speed in Lineage 2, and this is the reverse of that, but it also works on every other buff that provides you with movement speed. And on top of that, it decreases your speed by 10 and prevents any movement speed increasing buffs to be received on the target, which is also huge. And it lasts 2 minutes, which in a fight pretty much a death sentence. You can't run away, you are slow as hell, and no one else can help you run away. Huge stuff. Then we also have the same thing, but for physical defense buffs, and the same thing is it reduces defense even more and prevents any buffs. So you pretty much cast these two on the target and you can consider the target dead. Then we've got mana burn, which I believe Bards should have in Ashes and should definitely utilize to the max, because I want as much mana interactions as possible. Mana steal, mana transfer, mana leakage, mana burnage, whatever the hell, mana poison. So mana refresh, of course, obviously. So definitely required, and I think Bards would concentrate on that. I think mages were considered to be also mana related dudes, but we haven't seen much of that, so we'll see in the showcase if they show it. Then we've got a bit of healing. This is a fairly weak heal as compared to a proper healer, and a resurrection. I'm not sure if I want Ashes' Bards to be able to resurrect. I do like the interaction overall, mostly because if you have a cleric and a bard in your party, you would have two people who can resurrect each other. So if your healer drops, your bard can react and resurrect him, and the other way around. So it would be useful, but if I recall correctly, Steven said that we'll have like scrolls or whatever that are used in combat to resurrect, so I think it wouldn't be required, but we will see. So moving on to the next buffer, we've got a more magic oriented buffer, while also providing some very nice buffs for the fighters as well. I mean physical fighters. We've got the standard attack, defense, running speed. She also has vampiric at 9% of your outgoing melee damage into HP, quite nice for pretty much any melee class, although rogues rarely use this, mostly because they relied on crits rather than constant high DPS output. And even more on abilities than just crits from basic attacks, so it wasn't as important, especially when you have a shit ton of buffs and you are trying to stay on top of your optimizations. We've got accuracy, critical rate, critical damage, then we have a combo for... Girl, target yourself. We've got a combo for critical rate and critical damage, so if you remember what we had before, this is an additional combo, so it would add a slot instead of 2 while removing the previous ones. We've got the same lung capacity buff. Now as for magic stuff, we've got magical attack, magical crit, the same concentration, and this combo is increasing your magical attack and magical defense. So while this character doesn't have a magical defense buff as the previous had, she has a combo that does that. So with later stages, even some classes were not necessarily homogenized, but had even more overlap. So I think it was mostly done to let fewer people fill out more roles, because the game was losing players, and obviously not everyone could magically level up a new buffer up to high level, so it was just useful. And then we've got mana gain, which is what do I need for this? Well, whatever. It's pretty much just a buff that increases mana recharge of this class and another mana recharger. So the basic mana recharge is 136 per cast, while this one increases that by 85, so more than 50%, which is a nice buff for pretty much any mage party. We've got a strong vampiric buff, short duration, but 80% of your damage goes to you as HP, so huge stuff when your healer is low on MP or maybe even dead while you are in a melee party. We've got a just healing, I believe this is HP, but yeah, I think this is just a hot, right, healing over time. In terms of a huge buff like the Prophecy of Fire on the previous class, we've got Prophecy of Wind. Pretty much same stuff as before, but more concentrated on critical rate and damage rather than just physical output, and also provides 5% vampiric. So even more useful for fighters, but in a more self-sustaining way rather than just damage outputting. Pretty much same resistances, but also added resistance to buff cancellation and resistance to debuffs. Very useful stuff, because Lineage 2 has quite a few buff cancelling abilities and effects, and obviously resistance to debuffs is always good. And when it comes to buff cancelling, I definitely hope Ashes has a ton of that, and in a multitude of ways, just as the block shield, as the Prophet had, block windwalk. I'll showcase some other blocks later as well, I believe, or maybe not. Either way, any kind of buff cancellations or buff removals, buff steals, all of that stuff is great, and I definitely hope we see that in Ashes. Then, as a huge thing, this is mostly a mana recharges thing rather than a buffer, and we'll see if our bards do recharge mana, as I think they will, but in the Lineage 2 we've had these beauties. You cast this shit, it has a huge KD, but it recovers MP for all party members, and it recovers it fully. It's once an hour, but a huge thing for pretty much any PvP fight, especially in mage parties. In terms of debuffs, root, same shit, block shield decreases the defense, same as the Prophet, but she also have Stigma of Shilling, which increases melee outgoing damage or incoming on target. It says short range weapons by 40, but I'm not sure it's 40%, but it is a noticeable increase in melee damage output, so very useful skill for pretty much any melee party. So this was a relatively sought after class. She also has an AoE root that poisons people for 30 HP and MP burn for 10 seconds. Quite useful. This class is also more of a healer than Prophet, so I would assume like Bard Cleric would have this kind of stuff. We've got cancels paralysis and petrification, and curses, cures severe poisons, and bleeds. Huge stuff, especially considering that quite a few big bosses in Lineage 2 cast some kind of petrification or anchor or whatever the hell, paralysis in other ways. So this was very useful, especially when your main healer is trying to keep everyone alive. So she could just go and purify some targets. She has basic healing, also a resurrection, has mass purify, so pretty much this spell but for an entire party. Huge stuff, and surprisingly low on KD, which was also insane, but this is a very late stage in progress of the character. And she also has chain heal. This was added in a way later version of the game. It costs quite a ton of mana as compared to other stuff. This is 78, this is 194, but it's healing the entire party if they are relatively close together. It's obviously by its name, it's a chain heal, so the first target gets 30% HP regen, and then the more jumps happen, the fewer the heal. So classic chain effect, usually at least. This is more of a healer stuff, so I assume Bards Clerics will have something similar, but we'll see. Let's move on to our first true Bard of Lineage 2, who is a sinner. She is a light elf, while the dancers in Lineage 2 are dark elves. This is mostly was probably done to just separate the races and to present the game as less homogenized and everyone running as humans. But I mean, people were still mostly picking humans. In terms of buffs, her buffs, as well as the dancers, as I explained at the start, go to the additional line instead of the general. So if you already have 24 buffs here, the songs and dances will go in a separate line, which boosts you even further. In terms of buffs, we've got physical defense, speed, magical defense, critical rate of physical attacks, evasion, general HP regen, and Song of Purification, which 80% chance of removing party members' debuffs, and also gives you resistance to debuffs for 30%. And increases power of HP recovery by 30%. A fairly huge thing when you think about it. KD is at 3.5 minutes, so that is kind of long considering the duration is only 2. But it's a very useful thing, especially if you are facing one of the classes I'll showcase in just a few minutes. Other stuff is just more HP, magical and physical skill, MP consumption, and KD decreasement. Huge thing for pretty much everyone. Meditation that helps with MP recovery in both region and I believe recovery of the previous class, but I don't quite remember. We've got Champion, which is the same of MP consumption and reuse time, but for only physical classes. So in Lineage 2, mages were quite OP, so this class had 2 buffs for their KDs, while mages only had 1. But I mean, you gotta balance what you can balance. And we've got a revenge freaking reflect buff, so 20% of incoming melee damage goes out back to the target. Also very important for pretty much any stronger mobs, because as much as they hit you, they hit themselves sometimes even harder, especially when you can stack gear builds, several buffs of this, and one of the tanks nearly specialized in reflect damage, and from what I recall, they could boost it to a point where the reflective damage was like almost twice as strong, something like that. Relatively useful things in some builds. In terms of resistances, we've got resistance to dark, to elementals, to fire, to wind, and windstorm resistance is against archers, because together with mages, archers were usually quite strong, mostly because of the kiting and range attacks, but their crits, especially if their gear was quite nice, were heavy, sometimes like life-threatening heavy from full HP. So this was very useful for pretty much any melee party, and sometimes even for mage parties, because rangers were usually the main threat to mages, especially because quite often rangers would have a longer range of attack than mages, so definitely dangerous. In terms of debuffs, we've got root, but a very short range root. We've got a silence for magical attacks. We've got physical speed, attack speed and casting speed decreased by 30% for 10 seconds, and it's in AoE. Very useful skill, especially considering that both Sinners and Dancers in Lineage 2 stem off of the tank line of classes, so they are more tanky, they have more HP, more defenses, so they would just go into the Zerg, cast this a few times, and at least someone would be debuffed. Very useful skill. We've got a speed decrease by 30%, obviously huge. Then this is a AoE silence, but obviously with a longer KD than this one, and it's for 2 minutes. The success rate is, I believe, lower than the Sword Symphony, but still, again, very useful when you just run into the huge crowd and just use it. And as a huge last level skill, we've got does she have it? Yeah. First of all, it's a placement skill, so it's an AoE that you can place. As you can see, my cursor has changed, and when you cast it, it shows a huge dome that first of all, the enemy doesn't know whether it was their allies' dome or yours. Second of all, the AoE is pretty huge, so pretty much any choke point, any corridor, even just in a relatively big fights that are constantly moving, if you put this, as you saw, it lasted a few seconds. I believe it was like around 10. So anyone moving in and out, especially if you're trying to kite someone or to push someone into it, huge effects. And in terms of the effect itself, it removes songs and dances. So this entire line, if this was an enemy dome, would be gone. The costs on songs and dances are related. So for example, this says cost of 60, but when I use it, we go down relatively by 60, but then if I use a second one, I go down by 76, because each successive usage of a song or a dance costs more and more. So when we start casting, the mana flies away. They related in the way that if you have a singer and a dancer in a party and they start both singing and dancing roughly at the same time, they will burn each other's mana very, very fast. But players notice that if you start singing and dancing right at the same time, the game sees it as only one usage. So high level skill parties would usually do this kind of trick and would save as much of their bard's mana as they could. Which is especially huge when you realize that this dome removes the entire line. So if your bards are already low on mana, they have just buffed you, because this buff lasts only 2 minutes as compared to generalized 20-minute buffs. So you remove these buffs and now your bards can't even rebuff you. And these all provide relatively big bonuses to your stats, so it's a huge thing. And Dancer has it as well, and we will move on to it. On to our Dancer, whose hips don't lie. He also has Noise. Alright, I don't have the item. Either way, it's here as well, so in big fights there would be several domes, because mages have attacking domes. I believe other not buffers, I think rangers have their own dome of sorts, and someone else. I don't remember all classes by this point, because I played it a long time ago. Either way, when you have several domes on the field and you don't know who casted which and where, it's a whole mess. But I mean, that's what it takes to take down the Zerg. But in terms of this class's buffs, it's also a double buffer in terms of physical and magical buffs, and I would probably say this is the most important buffer in the game, purely because it's very versatile, it's even tankier than the Sinner, and it also has Medusa, that I will talk about a bit later. But in terms of just buffs, physical attack, attack speed, physical attack speed, physical critical damage, accuracy, and vampirism, 8%, which is quite a lot. In terms of magic, we've got magic attack speed, casting speed, and concentration that I talked about previously. We've got critical damage on magic attacks by 100%, so pretty much twice as hard. He also has Dance of Shadows, which is an ability that gives you stealth against PvE. So if your party wants to run through a dungeon instead of fighting through it, they just cast Dance of Shadows and run through it. Your running speed is way slower with it, but I mean, you sacrifice wasting time running rather than fighting, so it's still worth it. He also has Dance of Berserker, which is the same as the Prophet's buff Berserker, but a separate version of it, so you can double down on your glass cannonness. In terms of resistances, he has water, earth resistance, he has resistance to general environment-related damage, which is kind of unneeded in Lineage 2, because the damage of anything environment related is quite low. But considering that Ashes will supposedly have environmental hazards related to anti-Zerg mechanics of bosses, I do think that this kind of buff would be interesting. Although, on the other side of that thought, I guess a buff that directly reduces the effectiveness of anti-Zerg mechanics would probably be shit, I guess. So, maybe not. Then we've got general Holy and Dark resistance, and one of the big things is Dance of Bladestorm. It's similar to Windstorm of the Sinner, in that it reduces attacks from bows and crossbows, but it also decreases magical attack by 99%. So this was mostly a thing for melee parties, or maybe even for ranger parties if they saw that their ranger opponents were stronger. Very useful skill, especially when you are trying to close in on a ranger enemy party. Dancer also has a holy attack attribute addition, so instead of 20 you can have 40 if you combine it with the Prophet's buff. In terms of debuffs, we've got same short range route. He has a AoE poison, AoE physical and magical attack reduction by 30% for 10 seconds, pretty huge in a big fight. And we've got single targets freezing that decreases speed by 20%. We've got physical attack and defense by 23%. We've got poison, 62 HP for 30 seconds. All of these four are single target. And then we've got Medusa. Medusa is a complete AoE paralysis for 10 seconds. It was ginormous when it was introduced into the game. So in pretty much any big fight, you cast this, and KD is only 3 seconds longer than its duration. So even with a few dances, you could lock a Zerg down. And especially considering the fact that you can stop buffers, you can stop healers. Usually the Medusa was used around healers just to prevent the party from staying alive, but defending your own healers was also usually used. It all depends on tactics and strategies and whatever, but either way, very huge skill, and I do hope we have something like this. Because obviously Ashes will be about Zergs, so I think we need some stuff like this. Next, we'll go to a party buffer. So the first two classes that I showed off were mostly single target. The Singer and Dancer are party buffers, but as I keep saying, they have a separate line of buffs. And now we come to a specialized party buffer. All of this green stuff and purple as well, it's all full party buffs. They cost more in MP, but instead of buffing 9 people, you just 9 people each, you buff them all at once. So at the very end, it's still cheaper to do this. In terms of buff, it's same stuff, but for parties: physical attack, defense, magical defense, evasion, attack speed, critical rate, and damage for physical attacks, accuracy. We've got Chant of Victory, which is the same as Prophecies of Fire and Wind, but more generalized, so critical damage, well, not critical rates, all the similar stuff. But he also has Magnus's Chant, which is mostly for mages, because while Prophecies and the Chant of Victory decrease your movement speed, this thing does not. But it also doesn't give you too much of physical defense. So this is a triple down for mages if they want to go for a glass cannon build. Quite important, quite useful and important for, let's say, AoE PvE, when you're trying to just rain hellfire on a ton of mobs that are kited by a tank or someone like that. But in PvP, this was very rarely used because you would die like a twig. In terms of stronger buffs, we've got the stronger version of physical attack and defense buffs. We've got casting, we've got vampiric for 9%, very useful. We've got 4 combo buffs. We've got combat, we've got critical buffs, we've got vampiric and attack speed, and movement and evasion. So this was like the biggest whatever, you get what I mean. This motherfucker replaced like half the buffers purely because of all of this useful stuff, and especially considering that he was a party buffer rather than a solo target. So somewhat of an OP class, but usually people would have single target buffers along the way, rather this one would be at the end of your progression. So it was an interesting interaction between the class balances. He also has Berserker, so same stuff, the double-edged buff and a reflect buff as well. In terms of resistances, he has critical damage resistance by 30%, so similar to what the Prophet had in the counter critical buff that had a trigger. This is a simplified critical damage reduction for 30%. I believe they do stack, so I can even check that. Counter critical and shadow protection. No, they do not. Okay, I misremembered. So yeah, you either choose that one or this one. Mostly this would go towards mages because they don't need physical critical damage output, but either was fine. This was also appeared at an earlier stage of progress of this class, so you'd use this at least until your Prophet got the counter critical buff, because that was at 83 out of 85 levels, very late into the game. The other resistance is to buff canceling and resistance to debuffs, same as the Shilin Dark Elf had, and elemental resistances. As in terms of debuffs, he has a 157 HP dot that burns away HP. I personally think that Ashes's Bards could potentially concentrate on dots as their main source of damage. We'll see about that. I'm not sure, because rogues could potentially also have dots, and then what's the overlap, who's stronger and stuff like that. So we'll see where the Bard's damage output comes from, if there is even damage output. In terms of other debuffs, we've got sleep for 30 seconds, single target, not AoE like in Ashes. And we've got fear, and we've got confuses the enemy into attacking random targets. So pretty much a retargeting of a mob. I believe only a mob. I don't think it works on people, but I'm not quite sure. Either way, very interesting and important skill. Definitely one that in Ashes, retargeting, detargeting, all that kind of interactions, definitely important. And in terms of trigger abilities like the counter critical, and a thing that I definitely hope Ashes Bards have is action based triggers. So this class has, hey Vertic, Ludaloo, yes Ludaloo. I'm talking right about what I hope Bards have. He has a passive that creates a chance of activating Great Fury on a party member if Burning Chop is in use. Burning Chop is a physical attack that burns the enemy, but if you use it from time to time, the chance is relatively small. Oh, come on, man. Thanks for coming by, Vertic. Thanks for coming by. Come on. Trigger it, you piece of shit. You can do it. You did it last time when I did this. Dude, come on. Are you serious? Burn him. Okay, I'm like really unlucky today. I'm glad I didn't make any pulls in Genshin and ZZZ, because my god, I would have lost. Can you please, for the love of God, give me the buff? Are you serious right now? Either way, also I could probably buff, but whatever. My attack speed right now is 524. This Great Fury, fucking finally, it triggers 786, so 50% increase, which is ginormous for pretty much any physical class, both range and melee. So I want Ashes Bards to have this kind of stuff, where actions of the Bard are important, where whatever he does either boosts the effect of his skills, or maybe even just triggers them at the base level. So any kind of do a particular dance, and a buff triggers more than the dance itself. Maybe change from one dance to the other and another trigger happens. Any stuff like that. Very freaking important, and I definitely hope we have that. Now to go to another OP class. Nearly as OP as the dancer, but in a different way. This is a whole guild buffer, so instead of the previous class that was buffing just the party itself, this motherfucker can buff the entire guild as long as they are within the AoE. The buffs are somewhat limited, so let's just go through them real quick. Physical attack, physical defense, magical defense, casting speed, evasion, accuracy, attack speed, physical attack speed, movement speed, shield defense, same as the Prophet had, berserker, same stuff, combo stuff, for physical attack defense, critical combos, magical attack and magical defense, same as Shilin had. So you can see the pattern where some classes had more overlap. HP combo, same as Prophet had, combo of accuracy and decreased critical attacks against you, so this was a somewhat good alternative for melee classes as long as you didn't have the counter critical buff. And one of the important things this class has is combat points buff and restoration. So when it comes to generalized HP values in Lineage 2, we have red HP and yellow HP. Red HP is your base level HP, so mobs hit you for red HP. But in PvP, we also have the yellow HP, which is combat points, and buffs can increase it. What the fuck? Alright, Spirit Rose. Well, whatever, I think I have it. Yeah, I have it already here. The point is, in PvP, this class was quite important because it can also restore combat points, and his buff gives 800, while restoration restores for 857, which is kind of huge considering he only has 4k combat points. I believe he also has an AoE restoration for nearby clan members, again, an entire guild. Imagine 300 people running around in a relatively tight pack, and this motherfucker, even if he's just one of them, can restore them for 687 combat points. Huge stuff. I personally hate the entire hell of it because I want parties to matter, and solo buffers are also important, but I do not want any guild-wide, let alone alliance-wide buffs. Hell, I don't even want raid-wide buffs, because I want and require that only parties matter. The party is a unit. You need a full stack of people in your unit for it to be as optimized as possible. So I hope we don't get raid, guild, or alliance-wide buffs. I dearly hope. Then in terms of resistances, he has the same buff cancelling and resistance to debuffs. He also has Flames of Invincibility, the most OP shit in the game, and one of the main reasons why I don't want guild or alliance-wide effects. This motherfucker can use a big skill similar to Domes and MP region of other classes, but to give us 30 seconds of full invincibility, which is huge. You can't attack anyone because then the invincibility goes away, but you can fully run around, fucking jump, teleport, do whatever. So this was used mostly to bridge gates, bridge holes in walls, do stuff like that. So when you are trying to siege someone, you break the gates, but can't breach because there are AoEs or whatever. And so this would be used to give an entire guild 30 seconds of invincibility, where they can just run through. OP as all hell. I personally hope we do not see anything like that in Ashes, but we'll see. In terms of healing, he has some hordes for 85 region and 172 at cast, so a fairly nice thing, although cost at 239 is freaking huge. Although again, clan members HP, so huge. And he has the same chain heal that the Dark Elf mage had buffer, so similar, but I believe it's only to parties allies around, so no, it still would go to guildies as well. But the biggest point of this class, the biggest value point, is his debuff. So you can see all of this is debuffs. they are all pretty much all huge. He has the same fear and sleep as the previous party buffer, but everything else is specialized to him. It's an AoE root. AoE enemy melee attacks, right? Blocks. No. This is blockage for ordinary attacks, so basic attacks. So pretty much any archer who just shoots instead of using abilities, any melee damager who just uses basic attacks. For 10 seconds, they cannot attack at all. Huge fucking thing in pretty much any archer fight or some melee fights, because the most prominent melee party in Lineage 2 was the dagger party, and they usually relied on abilities rather than basic attacks, so not as useful against them. But archers were fucked completely. Then we've got AoE accuracy reduction by 12, while all accuracy buffs only give you 4, so you pretty much remove 4 buffs worth of accuracy with 1 debuff, and again it's all AoE. AoE speed reduction by 30%, attack speed reduction by 23%, HP recovery magic received by 50%, and the enemy clan members. So again, it's you jump into a Zerg of enemy enemy guilds, and it's just freaking starts spinning around and debuffing everyone for a ton. 50% incoming HP recovery is huge for any AoE heals, because usually AoE heals are weaker, but in big fights you usually use the AoE heals because you're trying to heal everybody at least somewhat, instead of healing only one dude, as opposed to like a PvE fight with a tank or whatever. So debuffing everyone by 50% of their HP recovery is absolutely massive. Then we've got Seal of Despair, which is kind of a mirror to the buff of this huge list, like physical attack, defense, magical, and whatever, the prophecies and chant of victory. So this decreases accuracy, physical attack, critical rate, critical damage, speed, magic defense, and attack speed by 30%. Enormous, again, nearby enemies, so it's an AoE, huge stuff again, but mostly aimed at physical attackers, so archers and melees rather than mages. Still utility very important, but in a mage fight useless. But the next one is silence for 1 minute. So any mage would be completely fucked for an entire minute, which is 100% death for any mage. Ginormous stuff. Again, like, this class is OP as hell. One of the biggest classes against Zergs and maybe even just smaller groups, because he can turn them off in all kinds of ways. Then we've got reduction of natural HP recovery by 100%. In L2, basic HP recovery is fairly low, so this was not really useful. I don't remember if it was useful against bosses. I think the success rate was way too low to even try, so I'm not sure about that. Then we've got huge thing in terms of skill KD. This debuff decreases KD by 200%, both on physical and magical skill. It is insane when you think about it, because a mage's abilities might KD in like 2 seconds or 3 seconds. 200 decrease makes them, what, like 6 to potentially maybe even 8, which is huge in a fight, considering that fights in L2 were quite fast. And from what we've seen, Ashes' fights will also be relatively fast-paced, so anything similar to this, where you can increase KD of your enemies, would be quite nice. Especially anti-Zerg, where the Zerg is trying to like assist kill a target or a group of targets, and you can stop them, or at least delay them by a ton. And his last debuff is for 5 minutes, blocks combat points, HP and MP recovery of nearby enemies by 70%. Again, freaking ginormous. You throw this in, and they can't heal in any meaningful way. Insane, crazy, and if Bards in Ashes come anywhere close to this kind of design, I would agree with the forum poster that bards are OP as hell already, or can be OP as hell. So I think that'll be that, mostly because the last class I wanted to show off is a very specialized to Lineage 2, so it's nothing too important, and as I said at the start of the stream, I wanted to keep this as concise and streamlined as possible, so we'll stop here. One last point that I made in the original version of the stream is these 6 classes have the same type of armor, not even type, the same exact gear set on them. And as you can see, they all look completely different. Their silhouette is different, visuals are as different as they can be, but it's all the same set. So we will have something very similar in Ashes, where racial visuals for gear will be different, most likely sex will also differ, I mean visuals for different sexes. So this is something that other games also had, and as the main example, Lineage 2. I hope that if we do have gear sets that are great, that have great visuals, that people won't cover them up with transmog, and then we will be able to see this kind of stuff and know the basic set effects from those sets, if we do have set effects, because again, we have so little info about the game, my god. But either way, I hate transmog, so that's gonna be my final message. Now let's raid. I believe Vladis should be on. Yeah, let's raid Vladis. Let's see. Wait, no, not that, not that. Give me this. Give me this. Give me that. Give me all of this. Anyone who stopped by, thanks for watching. Thanks for checking in. What the hell? Vladis, yes. Start raid. And I'll see you tomorrow at the stream. I think I'll restream it rather than just later analyzing it, so yeah, we'll see about that. See ya.